Look at this, it's not human. The readings were right, it's alive in there.
Oh God, its eyes, are they moving?
We need to secure it now!
For the third time that morning, her coffee growing cold as the data defied every geological principle she had learned in her 20-year career studying Arctic ice formations. The anomaly lay buried 847 meters beneath the Greenland ice sheet, a metallic mass roughly the size of a city block that shouldn't exist in nature. The magnetometer readings are off the charts, her research partner Dr. James Chen called from across the research station's cramped laboratory. Whatever's down there, it's not rock, and it's definitely not ice. Elena rubbed her tired eyes. The Arctic Research Station Alpha 7 had been her home for the past 4 months, a collection of prefabricated modules connected by heated tunnels, housing a team of 12 scientists studying climate change effects on polar ice. The endless white landscape outside the reinforced windows had become both beautiful and monotonous, broken only by the occasional polar bear or the dancing curtains of Aurora Borealis. The discovery had begun 3 weeks earlier during routine deep-core drilling operations. The team was extracting ice samples to analyze atmospheric conditions from millennia past when their equipment struck something that shouldn't have been there. The drill bit, designed to penetrate ancient ice and permafrost, had encountered a surface so hard it damaged the expensive tungsten carbide cutting head. "Look at this," Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the team's geophysicist, had said that day, pointing to the drill readouts. "The resistance patterns suggest we hit some kind of manufactured surface. The density readings are consistent with a titanium steel alloy." Initially, the team had theorized they had discovered some kind of natural mineral deposit, perhaps a meteorite that had impacted the region thousands of years ago and been gradually buried by accumulating ice. Such discoveries, while rare, were not unprecedented in polar regions. However, as they continued their investigation using ground-penetrating radar and advanced sonar equipment, the shape that emerged from the data was anything but natural. The object was clearly artificial, with smooth curves and geometric angles that spoke of intelligent design. More disturbing still, the ice core samples taken from directly above the anomaly contained microscopic particles of unknown composition, materials that didn't match any element on the periodic table yet somehow remained stable in analysis. Elena pulled up the three-dimensional reconstruction their computers had generated from weeks of scanning. The buried object resembled nothing so much as a massive ship, but not any vessel designed for terrestrial seas. Its hull curved in impossible ways that seemed to follow principles of physics she didn't recognize. Strange protrusions extended from what might have been its bow, while the stern appeared to taper into multiple wing-like structures. "Elena, you need to see this." Dr. Chen's voice carried an edge of excitement mixed with concern. He was hunched over a microscope, examining the latest samples they had extracted from the ice surrounding the object. "These particles, they're moving." She hurried over and peered into the eyepiece. The microscopic view revealed crystalline structures that pulsed with a faint, inner light. As she watched, the crystals seemed to reorganize themselves, forming complex geometric patterns that held for a few seconds before dissolving and reforming into new configurations. "That's impossible," she whispered. "They're behaving like they're alive, but they're clearly inorganic." "Get this," Dr. Chen continued, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the microscope settings. "When I introduced a small electrical current to the sample, the activity increased exponentially. It's as if these particles respond to energy." The implications were staggering. If the buried object was indeed some kind of vessel, and if these mysterious particles were part of its composition, then they were dealing with technology far beyond current human understanding. The question that haunted Elena's thoughts was whether this technology was terrestrial in origin, representing some lost human civilization, or if it came from somewhere else entirely. Dr. Mitchell burst into the laboratory, her face flushed from running through the frigid corridors. "The preliminary carbon dating results are back," she announced breathlessly. "The ice layers directly surrounding the object are approximately 50,000 years old. Whatever that thing is, it's been down there since before recorded human civilization." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Arctic cold. 50,000 years ago, human beings were still primarily nomadic hunter-gatherers, lacking the technology to create metallurgy, let alone construct vehicles capable of interstellar travel. Yet the evidence before them suggested that something had crashed into the Greenland ice sheet during the late Pleistocene epoch and remained frozen in time ever since. There's more, Dr. Mitchell continued. I've been analyzing the impact patterns in the surrounding ice. The trajectory suggests this object didn't just fall from the sky randomly. The angle of descent and the way the ice compressed around it indicates a controlled landing, as if whoever was piloting this thing was trying to minimize damage. The research station's communication array crackled to life, interrupting their discussion. The voice of Commander Patricia Hayes, their liaison with the Arctic Research Command, filled the room with static-laden words. Alpha 7, this is Arc Base. We've been monitoring your geological surveys. Please prepare a comprehensive report on your recent findings for immediate transmission. Elena exchanged glances with her colleagues. They had been careful to keep their discovery confidential, sharing information only within their small team. The fact that ArcBase was suddenly interested in their routine geological work suggested that somehow, word of their discovery had leaked to higher authorities. Commander Hayes, Elena responded into the microphone, we're still compiling our data. The preliminary results are unusual. Unusual how, Dr. Vasquez? Elena hesitated, knowing that her next words would change everything. Once they officially reported the discovery, their small research operation would likely be terminated and replaced by a much larger, probably military, investigation. The pure scientific exploration they had been conducting would be overshadowed by concerns about national security and potential technological advantages. We've discovered what appears to be a large metallic object buried beneath the ice sheet, she said finally. The preliminary analysis suggests it's artificial in origin and extremely old. The silence that followed stretched for nearly a minute. When Commander Hayes spoke again, her voice carried a gravity that made Elena's stomach clench with foreboding. Alpha 7, you are to cease all further investigation immediately. Maintain your current position and prepare for the arrival of a specialized research team. They will be on site within 72 hours. Is that understood? Understood.
Look at this,
Commander.
It's not human. The readings were right, it's alive in there.
Oh God, its eyes, are they moving?
We need to secure it now!
Impressive silence. Elena looked around at her team, seeing her own mixture of excitement and apprehension reflected in their faces. They had stumbled upon something that could revolutionize humanity's understanding of its place in the universe, but they were about to lose control of that discovery to forces beyond their control. Dr. Chen was the first to speak. 72 hours isn't much time. If we're going to learn anything meaningful about this thing before the cavalry arrives, we need to work fast. Elena nodded, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. Sarah, I want you to continue the deep scans. Try to map as much of the internal structure as you can. James, keep analyzing those particles. See if you can determine how they respond to different stimuli. What are you going to do? Dr. Mitchell asked. Elena pulled up the geological surveys on her computer, studying the topographical data with new purpose. I'm going to find us a way down there. If this thing has been waiting in the ice for 50,000 years, I want to see it with my own eyes before someone else decides we're not qualified to study our own discovery. The next 18 hours passed in a blur of intense activity. Dr. Mitchell's continued scans revealed that the buried object was even larger than they had initially estimated, extending nearly 400 meters in length and 150 meters at its widest point. More intriguingly, the scans suggested the presence of multiple internal chambers, some of which appeared to be filled with a liquid that remained unfrozen despite the sub-zero temperatures. Dr. Chen's analysis of the mysterious particles had yielded equally fascinating results. When exposed to various forms of electromagnetic radiation, the particles exhibited properties that seemed to defy conservation of energy. They appeared to absorb energy from their environment and convert it into different forms of radiation, suggesting some kind of advanced energy conversion technology. Elena had spent her time calculating the logistics of reaching the buried object. Using the station's thermal lance equipment, originally designed for creating access holes through thick ice for core sampling, she believed they could create a shaft large enough for human access. The process would take approximately 36 hours of continuous operation, leaving them with just enough time to conduct a preliminary investigation before the military team arrived. As the thermal lance began its work, carving a precise circular shaft through layers of ice that held the climate history of the planet. Elena found herself grappling with philosophical questions that extended far beyond her expertise in glaciology. If the object was indeed a spacecraft from another world, what did that mean for humanity's understanding of its place in the universe? Were they alone, or had other intelligences been visiting Earth for tens of thousands of years? The particles Dr. Chen had discovered suggested technology that operated on principles unknown to human science. If they could understand how these materials functioned, it might accelerate technological development by centuries. The potential for advancing human understanding of physics, energy, and materials science was limitless. But Elena also recognized the darker implications of their discovery. Throughout human history, technological advantages had been used as weapons of war and tools of oppression. In the wrong hands, alien technology could destabilize global power structures and potentially threaten the existence of human civilization itself. As the thermal lance continued its methodical descent through the ice, Elena made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She began encrypting copies of all their research data, storing them in multiple hidden locations. Whatever happened when the military team arrived, the knowledge they had gained would not be lost or suppressed. Humanity deserved to know what lay beneath the Arctic ice, regardless of what powerful interests might prefer to keep it hidden. The sound of the thermal lance changed pitch as it encountered something different than ice. Elena's heart raced as she checked the depth readings, 847 meters, exactly where their scans had indicated they would find the buried object. The lance had made contact with the alien vessel. Dr. Chen emerged from the laboratory, his face pale with exhaustion and wonder. Elena, you need to know what I've discovered about those particles. They're not just responding to energy, they're creating it. When I introduced a small electrical current, the particles generated nearly 3 times more energy than they absorbed. They're violating thermodynamics as we understand it. Elena stared at him, understanding the magnitude of what he was saying. Free energy? Possibly. Or energy drawn from some source we don't understand. These particles might be the key to solving humanity's energy crisis forever. The implications were staggering. Clean, unlimited energy could transform human civilization, eliminating poverty, enabling space exploration, and reversing environmental damage. It could also make the discoverer the most powerful entity in human history. Dr. Mitchell's voice echoed through the station's communication system. Elena, James, you need to get down here. The shaft has broken through. They raced through the corridors to the drilling site, where Dr. Mitchell stood at the edge of a perfectly circular hole that descended into darkness. The thermal lance equipment had been shut down, and a system of ropes and pulleys had been set up for human descent. The hull breached about 2 meters down from where we made contact, Dr. Mitchell explained. It looks like the thermal lance created an opening in what might be an access port. The metal around the breach is strange. It's not damaged the way normal metal would be. It's almost like it partially liquefied and then resolidified around the edges. Elena peered down the shaft, seeing the faint glint of artificial light far below. Light? You mean there's something still active down there after 50,000 years? That's what I thought, but look at this. Dr. Mitchell handed her a small device that measured electromagnetic radiation. The readings suggest that the light isn't artificial, it's coming from the hull material itself. The metal is producing a faint bioluminescence. The 3 scientists stood at the edge of the shaft, each understanding that they were about to cross a threshold from which there could be no return. Whatever lay below would fundamentally change their understanding of reality, and possibly the course of human history. Elena checked her watch, 28 hours until the military team arrived. She looked at her colleagues, seeing her own determination reflected in their faces. We go down together, she said. We document everything. And we prepare for the possibility that what we find down there might be more than our minds are ready to handle. As they began their descent into the shaft, the temperature around them seemed to warm slightly, as if the buried vessel was somehow generating heat. The walls of the shaft, carved through millennia-old ice, began to glow with the same faint light they had observed from the hull material. Elena realized that they weren't just descending into a buried spacecraft, they were descending into something that was still alive. Part 2, the confrontation within the descent took 47 minutes, their headlamps illuminating walls of ice that transitioned from stark white to a pale blue-green as they approached the alien vessel. Elena's breathing created small clouds of vapor that dissipated quickly in the warming air, and she noticed that her companions' expressions had grown increasingly tense as they rappelled deeper into the shaft. When they finally reached the breach in the hull, Elena experienced a moment of profound disorientation. The opening they had created led into a corridor that seemed to extend far beyond what should have been possible given the vessel's dimensions. The walls themselves appeared to be constructed from the same luminescent material Dr. Mitchell had detected, casting everything in an ethereal, shifting glow. "The spatial dimensions don't match our external scans," Dr. Chen whispered, his voice echoing strangely in the alien environment. "This corridor is at least 200 meters long, but the ship shouldn't be more than 150 meters at its widest point." Elena activated her recording equipment, documenting everything as they moved cautiously down the corridor. The floor beneath their feet felt solid but seemed to have a slight give to it, as if it were responding to their presence. More disturbing still, she could swear she heard something that sounded almost like breathing echoing from deeper within the vessel. The walls were covered with symbols that shifted and changed as they watched, rearranging themselves into patterns that seemed to follow some kind of linguistic logic. Elena found herself staring at one particular sequence of symbols that appeared to repeat at regular intervals, when suddenly, the meaning seemed to crystallize in her mind. "Warning," she said aloud, surprising herself. "That symbol sequence. I can understand it. It says warning, psychological integration protocols active." Dr. Mitchell stopped walking and turned to stare at her. "Elena, how could you possibly know what that means? We've never seen these symbols before." Elena touched her temple, feeling a strange tingling sensation. "I don't know. The meaning just appeared in my mind." It's like the symbols are designed to communicate directly with the brain's language centers. As they continued deeper into the vessel, the sensation of being watched grew stronger. Elena began to notice that the luminescent patterns in the walls seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, and she realized that the ship wasn't just alive, it was responding to them specifically. They entered a large chamber that defied all sense of perspective. The ceiling soared impossibly high overhead, while the floor seemed to extend in all directions beyond the reach of their lights. In the center of the chamber stood a series of crystalline structures that hummed with energy, surrounded by what appeared to be control surfaces covered in the shifting symbols. "Elena," Dr. Chen said, his voice tight with concern, "my readings are showing massive energy discharges from those crystals. Whatever this place is, it's still fully operational." Before Elena could respond, the crystals began to pulse more rapidly, and the chamber filled with a low harmonic tone that seemed to resonate in their bones. The symbols on the control surfaces began rearranging themselves more rapidly, and Elena found that she could understand more and more of their meaning. Navigation, consciousness mapping, species integration protocols. She read aloud, the words flowing from her lips without conscious thought. "This isn't just a ship. It's some kind of psychological research facility." The harmonic tone grew louder, and Elena felt something probing at the edges of her consciousness, like invisible fingers gently exploring the structure of her thoughts. The sensation should have been terrifying, but instead she found it oddly comforting, as if something immensely intelligent and benevolent was trying to understand who she was. Dr. Mitchell grabbed her arm. "Elena, your eyes, they're starting to glow the same color as the walls." Elena touched her face, feeling a warmth spreading across her features. In the reflective surface of one of the crystals, she could see that her eyes had indeed taken on the same blue-green luminescence that permeated the ship. More concerning still, she realized that she was beginning to understand not just the written symbols but the purpose of the vessel itself. "It's a teaching ship," she said, her voice carrying a strange harmonic undertone. "The beings who built this, they travel from world to world, studying intelligent species and helping them overcome their psychological limitations. They're trying to help species evolve beyond their destructive impulses." "Elena, you need to fight whatever's happening to you," Dr. Chen said urgently. "This thing is altering your brain chemistry somehow." But Elena found she didn't want to fight it. The presence in her mind was showing her things about human nature that she had never understood before. She could see the patterns of fear, aggression, and tribal thinking that had shaped human history, keeping the species locked in cycles of conflict and self-destruction. She could also see humanity's potential, what the species could become if it learned to transcend its primitive psychological programming. The central crystal pulsed brighter, and Elena felt her consciousness expanding beyond the confines of her individual mind. Suddenly, she was aware of her colleagues' thoughts and feelings with perfect clarity. She could sense Dr. Chen's growing terror as he watched her transformation, mixed with his scientific fascination at witnessing something unprecedented. Dr. Mitchell's mind was cycling between wonder and a desperate need to escape, torn between her curiosity and her survival instincts. "Don't be afraid," Elena said, though she wasn't entirely sure if she was speaking aloud or communicating telepathically. "They're not trying to hurt us. They want to show us something about ourselves." The chamber around them began to change, the walls becoming transparent to reveal the vast ice field above them. But, overlaid on this reality was another vision, the Arctic as it had been 50,000 years ago, when the ship had first arrived. Elena could see the primitive human settlements scattered across the landscape, small groups of early humans struggling to survive in a harsh environment. Through the ship's memory, she witnessed the arrival of its builders, beings of crystalline energy who existed primarily as consciousness rather than physical matter. They had come to Earth not as conquerors but as teachers, hoping to guide humanity's development away from the destructive patterns they had observed in countless other species across the galaxy. "They tried to help us before," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face as the weight of the revelation hit her. 50,000 years ago, they tried to teach our ancestors to overcome fear and violence. But we weren't ready. We drove them away." The memories continued to flow through her consciousness, showing her the tragic miscommunication that had led to the ship's crash. The primitive humans had encountered the crystalline beings and interpreted their attempts at mental contact as an attack. In their fear, they had used fire and crude weapons against entities that existed primarily as energy, forcing the ship to crash land in the Arctic ice. The beings had gone into some form of stasis, waiting for humanity to evolve to a point where they might be ready to receive the gifts of psychological transcendence. The ship had been monitoring human development for millennia, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself again. "Elena, please," Dr. Mitchell pleaded. "You have to break free of whatever this thing is doing to you. Remember who you are." But Elena found that she was remembering exactly who she was and, more importantly, who she could become. The ship's influence wasn't erasing her personality, it was helping her see beyond the limitations that had always constrained her thinking. She could feel her capacity for empathy expanding, her ability to understand complex systems improving, her tendency toward fear and aggression diminishing. "The particles James discovered," she said, her voice now carrying multiple harmonic frequencies. "They're not just energy converters. They're consciousness amplifiers. They help intelligent beings overcome the neurological limitations that prevent psychological evolution." Dr. Chun checked his instruments frantically. "Elena, your brain activity is off the charts. You're showing patterns I've never seen in human neurology. Whatever the ship is doing to you, it's fundamentally altering your consciousness." Elena turned to face her colleagues, and they stepped back involuntarily. Her appearance had changed subtly but unmistakably. Her skin carried a faint luminescence, her movements had taken on an otherworldly grace, and her eyes held depths of understanding that seemed to contain lifetimes of wisdom. "I'm still me," she said gently. "I'm just more. The beings who built this ship learned long ago that consciousness is the fundamental force of the universe. Matter and energy are just expressions of underlying consciousness. When a species learns to transcend its psychological limitations, it gains access to capabilities that seem miraculous." The crystals in the chamber pulsed in unison, and Elena felt the ship's consciousness focusing more intently on her companions. She could sense the alien intelligence evaluating Dr. Chen and Dr. Mitchell, determining their readiness for the same transformation she was undergoing. "No," Elena said firmly, surprising herself with her ability to communicate with the ship's consciousness. "They're not ready. Forced evolution creates trauma and rejection. They need to choose this path themselves. The pressure on her colleagues' minds eased slightly, and Elena felt a wave of approval from the ship's consciousness. The beings who had built this vessel had indeed learned that psychological evolution could not be imposed from the outside, it had to arise from within. "Elena, what's happening to you?" Dr. Mitchell asked, her voice small and frightened. Elena considered how to explain something that transcended normal human experience. Imagine that your entire life, you've been seeing reality through a narrow window. Suddenly, the wall falls away and you can see the entire landscape. That's what this is like. I can see the patterns that connect all consciousness, the ways that fear and limitation create suffering, the possibilities for transcendence that exist within every sentient being. The ship's memory banks continued to flow through her consciousness, showing her the history of countless worlds where species had successfully transcended their psychological limitations. She saw civilizations that had eliminated war, poverty, and environmental destruction not through technology alone, but through the evolution of consciousness itself. But she also saw worlds where the attempt at transcendence had failed, species that had rejected the opportunity for evolution and ultimately destroyed themselves through their own limitations. The pattern was depressingly consistent, species that clung to their familiar psychological patterns, even when those patterns led to suffering and extinction. "The military team that's coming," Elena said suddenly. "They'll see this discovery as a threat to be controlled or a weapon to be exploited. They'll approach it with the same fear and aggression that drove the ship to crash 50,000 years ago." Dr. Chen nodded grimly. "What do you think we should do?" Elena felt the ship's consciousness offering her a choice. She could remain here, continuing her transformation and eventually becoming something beyond human, serving as a bridge between species. Or she could return to the surface and try to prepare humanity for what was buried beneath the ice, though the risk of rejection and catastrophe was enormous. "There's a third option," she said, the solution crystallizing in her mind as the ship's consciousness shared its full plan. The ship doesn't need to remain hidden. It can reveal itself gradually, allowing humanity to choose its own pace of evolution. But it needs advocates, humans who can serve as intermediaries, helping to prevent the fear and misunderstanding that led to disaster before. The central crystal pulsed with approval, and Elena felt the ship beginning to prepare for a transformation of its own. After 50,000 years of waiting, it was ready to attempt contact with humanity again. "Elena," Dr. Mitchell said urgently, "I'm reading massive energy fluctuations throughout the ship. Whatever's about to happen, it's going to be big." Elena nodded, feeling the ship's consciousness withdrawing from her mind, though the changes it had made remained. She was still human, but she was also something more, a being capable of bridging the gap between species, of communicating concepts that transcended normal human experience. "The ship is going to surface," she said. Slowly, carefully, to avoid causing panic. "But, when it does, the world is going to change forever." As they began their ascent back through the shaft, Elena felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She had been chosen to help humanity navigate the most critical moment in its history, the moment when it would be offered the choice between psychological evolution and continued limitation. The question that haunted her as they climbed toward the surface was whether humanity would prove ready to transcend the fear and aggression that had defined its history, or whether it would repeat the tragic pattern that had played out 50,000 years before. Part 3: The man who destroys his weak self. When they emerged from the shaft, the Arctic landscape had transformed. The aurora borealis blazed across the sky with unprecedented intensity, while the ice beneath their feet hummed with barely perceptible vibrations. Elena could feel the ship beginning its careful ascent through layers of ancient ice, preparing to reveal itself to a world that might not be ready for what it represented. Dr. Chen immediately began taking electromagnetic readings, his face growing pale as he studied the data. "Elena, the energy output from below is increasing exponentially. If this continues, it's going to be visible from orbit within hours." Elena nodded, feeling the ship's consciousness still connected to her own thoughts, though more gently than before. She understood that they had perhaps 12 hours before the vessel broke through the surface, 12 hours to prepare humanity for contact with an intelligence that operated beyond their current understanding of reality. "We need to get to the communication array," she said, her mind racing through the implications of what they needed to accomplish. The world's governments need to understand what's happening here before they respond with military force. As they made their way back to the research station, Elena found herself grappling with the magnitude of the psychological transformation she had undergone. The fear and uncertainty that had dominated her thinking for most of her life had been replaced by a profound sense of clarity and purpose. She could see the patterns of human behavior that created suffering, but, more importantly, she could see the potential for transcendence that lay dormant within every human mind. Dr. Mitchell grabbed her arm as they approached the station. "Elena, before we contact anyone, you need to understand something. You've been down there for 6 hours, but, according to our instruments, you've only been gone for 45 minutes. Time was moving differently inside that ship." Elena paused, considering this information. The ship existed partially outside normal spacetime, which explained both its impossible internal dimensions and the temporal displacement. For beings of pure consciousness, linear time was merely one dimension among many that could be manipulated and transcended. "That's going to make our report even harder to believe," Dr. Chen said grimly. Elena looked at her colleagues and felt a surge of compassion for the burden they were about to bear. They would have to serve as witnesses to something that challenged every assumption about reality, and they would inevitably face skepticism, ridicule, and, potentially persecution from those who preferred comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. "There's something I need to tell you both," Elena said as they entered the station. "The transformation I underwent, it's not permanent unless I choose to make it so. The ship's consciousness gave me the ability to dial back the changes, to function as a normal human when necessary. But, it also gave me the ability to help others make the same choice I made." Dr. Mitchell stared at her. "You mean you could change us the way you were changed?" "Only if you wanted me to. The ship's builders learned that forced evolution creates trauma and rejection. Consciousness can only transcend its limitations when it chooses to do so freely." Elena moved to the communication array and began preparing a message that would fundamentally alter the course of human history. She knew that her words would be analyzed by linguists, psychologists, and military strategists around the world. Every phrase would be scrutinized for signs of deception, mental instability, or foreign influence. To all world governments and scientific institutions, she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. "My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez, and I am reporting a discovery that will require humanity to reconsider its place in the universe." As she spoke, Elena felt the ship's consciousness monitoring the transmission, ready to provide evidence of its existence if her words alone proved insufficient. The beings who had built the vessel understood that trust had to be earned gradually, through consistent demonstration of benevolent intent rather than overwhelming displays of power. "The entity buried beneath the Arctic ice is not a weapon or a tool of conquest," Elena continued. "It is a teaching vessel, created by beings who have transcended the psychological limitations that create war, suffering, and environmental destruction. They have returned to offer humanity the same opportunity for evolution, but only if we choose it freely." She paused, feeling the weight of every word. "This choice will define our species' future. We can continue on our current path, limited by fear and aggression, ultimately destroying ourselves as countless other species have done. Or we can learn to transcend those limitations, gaining access to capabilities and understanding beyond our current imagination." Dr. Chen was monitoring communication channels, his face growing increasingly tense. "Elena, we're getting responses already. Military frequencies are lighting up across North America and Europe. They're mobilizing forces for deployment to our location." Elena felt a surge of frustration, recognizing the same pattern of fear-based response that had led to catastrophe 50,000 years before. Humanity's first instinct when confronted with the unknown was to approach it as a potential threat rather than an opportunity for growth. "There's something else," she said into the microphone, her voice taking on the harmonic undertones that indicated deeper connection to the ship's consciousness. "The beings who built this vessel have been monitoring human development for millennia. They know about our nuclear weapons, our environmental crises, our cycles of war and suffering. They're offering to help us transcend these patterns, but only if we can overcome our tendency to respond to new possibilities with fear and violence." The response was immediate and predictable. Elena watched as Dr. Chen's instruments showed military aircraft approaching their location from multiple directions. The electromagnetic signatures suggested fighter jets, transport aircraft, and what appeared to be some kind of experimental high-energy weapons platform. "They're treating this as a military situation," Dr. Mitchell said, her voice tight with apprehension. "Elena, if military forces engage with that ship, the ship won't fight back," Elena said with certainty. "The beings who built it transcended aggressive impulses eons ago. But if humanity demonstrates the same fear and hostility that led to the crash before, they'll simply leave and never return." Elena felt the ship's consciousness touching her mind again, sharing its assessment of the approaching military forces. The alien intelligence could perceive the emotional and psychological states of the pilots and soldiers heading toward them, and what it found was depressingly familiar: a mixture of fear, aggressive posturing, and the kind of tribal thinking that had kept humanity locked in cycles of conflict for millennia. "There's still time," Elena said, as much to herself as to her companions. "If we can demonstrate that some humans are ready for psychological evolution, the ship's builders might be willing to work with us gradually." She closed her eyes and felt her consciousness expanding again, touching the minds of the approaching military personnel. Through the ship's enhanced abilities, she could perceive their thoughts and emotions with startling clarity. Most were operating from a foundation of fear and trained aggression, but she sensed a few individuals whose minds remained open to possibilities beyond their conditioning. Among the approaching forces was a pilot whose consciousness burned with genuine curiosity rather than hostility. Colonel Marcus Reed flew his F-22 fighter jet with precision born of years of training, but his thoughts were focused on the scientific implications of what lay beneath the Arctic ice rather than potential threats to national security. Elena reached out with her transformed consciousness, gently touching the edges of Colonel Reed's mind. She didn't force contact or try to overwhelm his thoughts. Instead, she simply offered him a glimpse of what she had experienced, letting him choose whether to accept the vision or reject it. For a moment, Colonel Reed's consciousness expanded beyond the confines of his individual perspective. He saw the ship not as a potential weapon but as a repository of knowledge that could transform human civilization. He felt the presence of intelligences vast and benevolent, beings who had transcended the limitations that kept humans trapped in cycles of fear and aggression. The vision lasted only seconds, but it was enough. Colonel Reed's radio crackled to life as he broke formation and began circling the research station rather than approaching in attack formation. "Command, this is Falcon Leader," Reed's voice carried a note of wonder that hadn't been there before. "I'm reading energy signatures that don't match any known technology. Request permission to establish communication protocols rather than treating this as a hostile contact." The response from military command was swift and predictable: "Falcon Leader, maintain attack formation and await further orders. This is a potential national security threat." Elena felt the ship's consciousness analyzing the communication, recognizing the same patterns of institutional fear that had led to tragedy before. But she also sensed a growing awareness among individual humans who were capable of transcending their conditioning when presented with larger possibilities. Dr. Chen was monitoring multiple communication frequencies, his face reflecting the chaos of military and governmental responses to their transmission. "Elena, we're seeing massive mobilization across multiple countries. The Russians are scrambling forces from their Arctic bases, the Chinese are deploying from their polar research stations, and the Americans have activated emergency protocols. The classic human response to the unknown: assume it's a threat, claim territory, prepare for conflict." Elena felt a deep sadness as she recognized how little human psychology had evolved since the first contact attempt 50,000 years before. But then, she sensed something different. Among the approaching forces were individuals whose consciousness remained open, humans who carried within themselves the potential for the same transcendence she had experienced. Scientists, soldiers, pilots, and politicians who had not yet allowed fear to close their minds to transformative possibilities. "I need to try something," Elena said, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated with the ship's consciousness. "The ship's builders left me with the ability to catalyze psychological evolution in others, but only in those who are ready to choose it freely." She expanded her consciousness again, reaching out to touch the minds of every human approaching their location. She didn't try to force change or overwhelm their thoughts. Instead, she offered each person a simple choice. They could continue operating from their familiar patterns of fear and aggression, or they could allow themselves to experience a glimpse of transcendence. The response was mixed but encouraging. Out of nearly 200 military personnel approaching the site, approximately 30 individuals chose to accept the offered vision. Elena felt their consciousness expanding as they experienced, for the first time, the possibility of existence beyond fear, beyond the tribal thinking that had shaped human history. Colonel Reed was among those who accepted the transformation, and Elena felt his awareness blooming as he understood the true significance of what lay beneath the Arctic ice. Through the enhanced perception granted by contact with the ship's consciousness, he could see the approaching situation not as a military confrontation but as humanity's greatest opportunity for evolution. "Command, this is Falcon Leader," Reed's voice carried new authority as he spoke. "I'm requesting immediate stand-down of all aggressive postures. What we're dealing with here isn't a threat, it's a gift. These beings have technology that could solve every major problem facing humanity, but only if we approach them with wisdom rather than weapons." The transformation was spreading. Elena could sense the 30 individuals who had accepted psychological enhancement reaching out to their colleagues, sharing the vision of transcendence through personal example rather than force. The change rippled through the approaching military forces like a virus of enlightenment, creating pockets of evolved consciousness within the larger framework of institutional fear. But she could also sense the resistance. Military commanders who interpreted the changing behavior of their personnel as evidence of alien mind control. Government officials who saw transcended consciousness as a threat to existing power structures. Fear-based thinking pushing back against the possibility of evolution. "Elena," Dr. Mitchell said urgently, "something's happening to the ice around the station. It's beginning to crack." Through the station's windows, they could see massive fissures spreading across the ice field as the buried ship prepared to surface. The ancient ice that had held the vessel for 50,000 years was finally yielding to forces beyond human understanding. Elena felt the ship's consciousness communicating its intentions. It would surface slowly and peacefully, making no aggressive moves despite the military forces approaching. It would offer humanity the choice between evolution and limitation, between transcendence and the familiar patterns of fear and conflict. The outcome would depend on whether enough individual humans could overcome their conditioning to choose growth over security, possibility over familiarity, transcendence over the comfortable limitations of unexamined existence. As the ice began to split and the first glimpses of crystalline hull became visible beneath the surface, Elena realized that she had become something unprecedented in human history, a bridge between species, a translator of consciousness, a living example of what humanity could become. But, more than that, she had become living proof of the ancient wisdom that had been carved into the ship's memory banks millions of years before. The being who destroys their weak self can never be destroyed by others. True power came not from external force but from internal transformation, not from defeating enemies but from transcending the psychological patterns that created enemies in the first place. The ship rose slowly through the fractured ice, its crystalline hull gleaming with inner light as it revealed itself to a world that might finally be ready to receive the gift of transcendence. Around the emerging vessel, humans faced the most important choice in their species' history: to remain bound by fear and limitation, or to embrace the possibility of becoming something magnificent beyond their current imagination. Elena stood at the window of the research station, her transformed consciousness bridging the gap between human and transcended being, ready to help her species navigate the most critical moment in its evolution. The weak self that had been dominated by fear and limitation was gone forever, replaced by awareness vast enough to encompass both human and alien consciousness. In her transformed state, she understood that this moment had been inevitable from the moment humans first looked up at the stars and wondered if they were alone. The question had never been whether contact would occur, it had been whether humanity would be wise enough to recognize transcendence when it was offered. The ship completed its emergence from the ice and hung suspended above the Arctic landscape, neither threatening nor passive, simply present, a crystalline promise of what consciousness could become when it transcended its evolutionary limitations. Around it, military forces struggled with choices that would echo through history, while individual humans grappled with the most fundamental question any intelligence could face: whether to remain as they were, or to become something greater. Elena smiled, feeling the weight of infinite possibilities settling across her shoulders like wings of light.